There's more breaking news. Another big story reverberating likely inside Trump world. A grand jury investigation by federal prosecutors is probing whether classified documents and classified material from Donald Trump's White House that ended up at Mar-a-Lago was at any point along its journey mishandled. That's according to a brand new scoop published this afternoon in the New York Times. This move marks an escalation that, according to the Times reporting, suggests the Justice Department is examining the role of Donald Trump and other White House officials in handling sensitive materials as Trump's time in the White House drew to a close. The Times adds these key details, quote, in recent days, the Justice Department has taken a series of steps showing that its investigation has progressed beyond the preliminary stages. Prosecutors issued a subpoena to the National Archives and Records Administration to obtain the boxes of classified documents. That's according to two sources. And as Donald Trump faces a swirl of compounding legal problems in the wake of his fraught election loss and apparent coup attempt, the Times points out this key implication of today's breaking news. Quote, the prosecutors' moves in the documents case show that the Justice Department under Attorney General Merrick Garland is at least willing to examine a matter that may ultimately touch directly on the president's conduct. Joining us now, one of the reporters on that news story, Mike Schmidt, New York Times Washington correspondent and an MSNBC national security contributor. Dan is still at the table. Mike, take us through what you guys are reporting.
Well, for us, I think the most significant thing is that since Trump left office, the biggest question has been, what is the Justice Department going to do about him? And most of those questions have been about January 6th.
Right.
He's been criticized by Democrats and anti-Trump Republicans who, you know, they really want the Justice Department to do something. Here, the Justice Department is doing something in regards to Donald Trump and to conduct that went on in the White House in the final days of the administration about how these documents made their way out of the White House into Mar-a-Lago. So, you know, for all of the critics of the Justice Department who have said, hey, where's the Justice Department on this issue, they are going full bore to try and figure it out. Now, I would just say, just a note of caution on this, is that these are very difficult cases to be made. We obviously know that from the Hillary Clinton stuff. But the government often has to run this stuff down. They have to do a full investigation to understand what happened to the materials. So were those materials potentially compromised? Did some, you know, could some foreign actor or someone have accessed them? And if they did, does the government have to go back and change its sources and methods? It's a national security issue that is caused by the mishandling of these materials.
So I guess what you're saying is it might not necessarily look like a prosecution, a criminal one, but there is a national security aspect to what DOJ is going to have to do. And I think anybody, you know, who's followed the last 5 years knows that Mar-a-Lago isn't exactly locked down. I mean, what is sort of the operational security at Mar-a-Lago?
Well, I think these were sitting in cardboard boxes. And so, you know, what happened to those boxes? Who had access to them? These are things that the department wants to know, because they're going to look at the information that was in the documents and they're going to say, okay, like, you know, and I'm just making this up, this came from the CIA, this came from here. We need to tell them that their materials were in these documents, because who knows what happened with these boxes that were these boxes. It's not like these boxes were just sort of like missing for a few days or a few weeks. They're missing for many months. They didn't go back to the National Archives for almost a year after they were down there. So the Justice Department will want to understand where those documents went, who had access to them, why were they taken out of the White House, were they declassified as they went out of the White House, what is it that happened to them?
It's been a busy time for the National Archives in the post-Trump presidency. Something in Mike's reporting stuck out to you that's interesting.
Yeah, Mike and Maggie said in their reporting that this was one of several requests that Department of Justice has made to NARA, the archives. And presumably, I would guess as a prosecutor, you only make one request for these classified documents. So that would be one of them. But I'm curious as to what the other requests are from DOJ to NARA. And the reason why I'm drilling down on this is, of course, the archives would have emails, documents, other materials from the time from the election until January 6th. And they may be making requests to the archives for some of that information that would be relevant to a Department of Justice investigation of the coup. This is pure speculation, but it is.
This is like the smoke coming out of the Vatican,
but there
right?
clearly are some other requests, and it doesn't make sense that they would be related to the classified material. So one question for you, Mike, is to try to figure out what it is.
Yeah. If we knew, we would have written it. It's a great question. I mean, and as we know, the National Archives have been asked by Congress for those documents. The Trump folks went to court to try and block it. They failed. So what you're saying is that has the same thing gone on with the Justice Department? Has the Justice Department basically headed down that path? And what have the Trump folks done about that? Did they go to court under seal to try and fight that? You know, it's a great question. I don't know.
I mean, isn't some of the vehicle for our knowledge of this that Congress wanted to know what was in the boxes, and DOJ in some ways is confirming that you can't look at it because we are? Isn't that a push and pull?
And they said, but that could be the counterintelligence national security aspect, where they have to do their due diligence and figure out what exactly was compromised and whether it was compromised. A sort of separate and parallel investigation will be what happened. How did these classified materials end up at Mar-a-Lago? I dealt with classified materials every day on the House Intelligence Committee. There are extremely sophisticated, complicated, and onerous procedures that you have to deal with when you're dealing with classified information. These are not just documents that are thrown around. They are put in lockboxes when you go somewhere. And the other thing that jumps out at me is when the reporting about that gap in January 6th of the president's phone calls, there was a lot of reporting about who might have known. And one of the things that jumps out to me, which I also experienced with impeachment, is the lower level staff members generally try to do their job correctly, and they will abide by those restrictions. So the real question then becomes, how did 15 boxes that included classified information get from the White House to Mar-a-Lago? Donald Trump wasn't packing the boxes, but did he say, I want to bring this with me, or did he have someone else say? And that's what this investigation is. And the other key point is that they're also starting to talk to people. It's not just the records. They're interviewing witnesses.
The key here in this sort of investigation, where it would become a problem, is, and we sort of learned this from the Hillary Clinton email investigation, if there was an instance in which someone said to Donald Trump, you cannot take these are classified, if there's someone that could say that's a problem, because he sort of knowingly is taking these things.
Well, who wouldn't say that?
Well,
who was left? Oh, the coup plotter, Mark Meadows. I mean, who was around? I'm serious. Who was around in the end? Who packed him? Not Melania.
I don't know. But if these documents were sort of like they were hastily leaving the White House and there was stuff that he had up there and they just kind of threw it all in boxes and it went, that's one thing. If he was specifically told, you cannot do this, you should not do this, that's what would move the ball, and that's what would be a problem.
And those kinds of people are national security types who would seem to me, even in Trump world, to be more likely to cooperate with an investigation by the Justice Department. I just feel like we can't remember what real people were around.
They all will cooperate. I mean, the lower level, for sure, and the lower level staff members will cooperate. Right. They don't have political cover. They don't have deep cover, and they don't have political cover.